our seats, we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Cornell Clayton. I'm the director of the Thomas S. Foley Institute here at WSU. And on behalf of the Institute and on behalf of the MLK Committee here at WSU, I want to welcome you out to our event today. Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to point out that we're beginning a series of events on the incoming Trump administration. They begin next week on Wednesday. We have 2 events that day. The keynote for that whole series of events on the Trump administration is going to be given by Paul Pierson. He's chair down at the University of California, Berkeley. Has written many books on the broad sweep of American political history and politics in the 20th century. Most recent book's entitled America Amnesia. He'll be addressing the changing political landscape in Donald Trump. Earlier in that day, that's at 4:30, that's in the Cub Auditorium. And earlier in the day, we have a conversation between Paul Pierson and Chris Parker, who's a professor of political science from the University of Washington, written extensively about race politics in the United States. They'll be having a conversation on race and the Trump administration, so that should be very interesting as well. That'll be a Coffee and Politics event like this over the noon hours. So put those on your calendar. Then we have several other events that will be upcoming in the next couple of months. Today, however, we are privileged to have with us a speaker, Charlene Carruthers, and she will be speaking about, we have a slightly inaccurate title that we've advertised. She informs me what she's really going to be talking about is the movement for Black Lives, and she'll tell you why that's an important distinction between that and the Black Lives Matter movement. Charlene Carruthers is a community organizer and a writer with experience in racial justice, feminist issues, and youth leadership. She currently serves as the National Director of Black Youth Project 100, an activist organization of young people dedicated to justice and freedom for all black people. She is also a board member of Sister Song, a reproductive justice organization promoting solidarity among women of color. Charlene has facilitated and developed political training programs for organizations such as the NAACP, the Center for Progressive Leadership, Wellstone Action, and Young People For. Charlene was named the Organizer of the Year by the New Organizing Institute in 2015. She received her BA in History and International Studies from Wesleyan University in Illinois and a Master's of Social Work at Washington University in St. Louis. Join me now in welcoming Charlene Carruthers.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How you doing? Yeah. I'm going to do my best to keep you awake while you have your stomachs full of pizza and other things. And so first I'll say thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with you all today. It's been a long time coming, preparing for a month now, and especially thanks to Maria for all the work that you do that I have no idea that you did. And other people, and people don't see it, but I'm sure you do a lot. I know you do a lot, so thank you. I'm here today to talk about the work that I do, and as importantly, or even more importantly actually, the work that the people that I'm in community with across the country and even across the world. And so, as shared, my name is Charlene Carruthers, and I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. To parents who are a son and a daughter of parents from Mississippi. So my grandparents migrated from Mississippi, and I do not know where my father's mother comes from exactly, but I know that my mother's mother is from Greenville, Mississippi. And from the slight twang you hear in my voice to the food that I eat and many of the everyday practices in my family and in my community and throughout the city of Chicago, so much of it is connected to the South in this country. And so for me, that's important to bring up because how I see myself in this world and the work that I do is deeply connected to our histories of resistance and resilience in this country and on this particular land, right? And its connections to other places. And so, as I mentioned, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and at a very early age, my parents told me I needed to do 2 things. One was that I needed to get an education. They just told me you need to go to school, you need to get your education. And then 2, they said that I needed to have respect for people no matter who they were and where they came from. And so they said this within the context of the neighborhood I grew up in, the Back of the Yards neighborhood, which at the time growing up, I had no idea of any historical significance of the Back of the Yard. If anybody has read like The Jungle by Upton Sinclair or knows about Saul Alinsky and the work that he did, that's the neighborhood that those things happened in. I didn't know any of that growing up. What I knew is that we were the only black family in a predominantly Mexican immigrant and Mexican American neighborhood. And for what that meant for my mom is that sometimes we would make food that our neighbors were making. Like, she learned the things that they would make. Still couldn't speak a lick of Spanish when I was a kid. It's something that I studied throughout school, right? And so I had a sense that there was something at play as a young person, and first learned about power in experiences with going to the public aid or the welfare office with my mom. And it was actually not too far from where I live right now in the Bronzeville neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, where we would enter this room that was filled with like these kind of discolored chairs. At one point they were orange and green and yellow, like right at one point. But by the time we got there, all types, like they were pretty dingy chairs and mostly filled with black and Latina women and their children. And what I remember most was walking up to the front desk, and you know, I'm little now, and I was a little thing back then too, smaller, believe it or not, and physically have to look up to the people at the front desk. And later I learned, as a graduate student in social work school, that these folks, they may have had just a little bit more education than my mom did. They may have had a high school education, and they were likely being told how to treat people. There was a culture of how to talk down to people, how to be condescending. I didn't understand as a kid why they would ask my mother all types of questions, and why they couldn't know that my dad actually did live in the household. I didn't know all answers to those questions. But what those things taught me, they taught me about power. Power dynamics, people having power over people, and people who have very negative experiences with power. And so I carried that with me through the organizing work that I've done since then. I've been an organizer and an activist now for 12 years. I started when I was 18, so y'all can do the math. How old I am. Actually 13 years ago now at this point. And it was actually when I was a first-year student in college that I had the opportunity to go study in South Africa, study politics in South Africa. And I don't know if anyone else has been there before, but it blew my little mind. It blew my mind. Because I was there 10 years after Nelson Mandela had been elected as president, so I was there in 2004. And I was learning for the first time what it meant to be black in an international context. I was coming from the south side of Chicago. There's a book called American Apartheid that is based in Chicago. You all should check it out. And that's still a deeply segregated city. And then visiting South Africa to study politics. And so there were many things that were similar, many things that were different as well. And then I went back and I decided I wanted to do something. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew where I come from. I knew what was still happening to black people. And I knew I wanted to do something about it. So fast forward several years, we get to 2009. 2008. Anybody remember what happened in 2008? What happened? A little thing happened in 2008. The country elected its first black president, right? And I was living in St. Louis at the time, in social work school. And I just thought I wanted to do youth leadership development work, public policy work. And then this election is going on, and I decide that I want to work on local candidate races. So one day, I'm driving back from North County, St. Louis. Is anybody from Missouri here? In St. Louis? So I'm driving back from North County, St. Louis. I volunteered all day on a local campaign for someone a young black man who was running for the state legislature in Missouri. And North County is adjacent to St. Louis City proper. And I'm pulled over. I have my music playing, and I'm pulled over by a police officer. And I get out I pull over, he comes to the car, and he starts to cuss me clean out. Like, saying all types of things, accusing me of drinking and having drugs. I had a cup of orange juice in the cup holder. And he was a black police officer as well. And he told me to get out of the car. He searched my car, and I vividly remember a younger black man walking past and telling me, like basically giving me instructions on what to do to try to remain safe in the situation. Because I've been in cars where people were stopped before, but I'd never been stopped and harassed and just literally cursed out by a police officer. And so I sat on the curb. He was like, you know, don't move and don't say anything. So the officer gives me a speeding ticket. And then I go to traffic court. Now, in 2014, on August 9th, does anybody remember what happened on August 9th in 2014?
Ferguson? Ferguson?
Mike Brown was killed on August 9th, 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri, which is in North County, St. Louis. And so the same, if anyone's ever heard about the Department of Justice report that was made on policing in Ferguson, one of the findings that came out of all of the work that happened there is that this county was essentially operating off of criminalizing black people, and primarily poor black people, and people would receive tickets. And they would have to go to traffic court, they would have to stand in long lines, and this revenue was fueling the economy, or is fueling the economy. So that traffic court in Vale, the city, is the same traffic court I was in after I was pulled over by the police officer and given a speeding ticket. And I remember going into that traffic court and seeing it wall-to-wall black folks. Wall-to-wall black folks who had some type of moving violation. And I didn't know then the full context of what was happening there. I didn't have words for it. I didn't have an understanding for it. Mind you, at this point I'd done student activism work. I started to learn about organizing because the two things are different. And I can say why they're different. I started to do a little organizing work locally in St. Louis. And it was in 2014 where a lot of that stuff came full circle for me. Because by then I had an understanding for what was going on. And leading up to that, many years before, some people start this particular movement era in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, right? Which was now, last year was 10 years. 2014 was 10 years, so now I think we're at 12 years, coming up on 12 years perhaps, 12 or 13 years since Hurricane Katrina. Some people started at, do folks remember, this is a while ago, the Gen 6 campaign in Monroe, Louisiana? I can't remember the exact city. Where there were mass mobilizations across the country down to Louisiana, right? Some people mark it there. Some people mark it in the campaign work that was around stopping the execution of Troy Davis in the state of Georgia, right? And then some people mark it from the killing of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman. And then some folks started August 9th, 2014. For me, the broader movement for black liberation started the very first moment an enslaved African was forced to a land outside of their home. That's when this thing started, because there was resistance then, right? What we're talking about right now in this particular moment is the movement for Black Lives. This is just the latest era of black liberation struggle. It's not the first, and it likely won't be the last. So in 2013, Black Lives Matter emerged, right? Do people remember that moment? It was actually the Saturday night that George Zimmerman was found not guilty in the killing of Trayvon Martin, right? He received a not guilty verdict. That exact same night, I was outside of Chicago at a convening called the Beyond November Movement Convening. And that was the convening that launched my organization, BYP 100. And so how that even happened that same weekend, I don't know. But I don't believe in coincidence. Because this convening had been planned a year before. The date had been set the previous year. And 100 young black activists from across the country were invited to attend. And Dr. Kathy Cohen was one of the primary conveners of that convening. And when they're Saturday night in this big conference room, and someone learns that the verdict in George Zimmerman's trial, which lots of people called the Trayvon Martin trial, but Trayvon Martin was not technically on trial, even though the American public and media put him on trial. And so we're gathered together Saturday night, holding hands in a circle, and we learn that he received a not guilty verdict. Were people surprised that he received a not guilty verdict? Maybe. But for many of us, it was basically a reinforcement of the so-called criminal justice system, definitely of the judicial system in the United States of America. And it reinforced to us what we already knew, and it was a call for us to actually organize a national base building organization. Because before that, we know the Dream Defenders were among the first to respond after Trayvon Martin was killed, and to mobilize and organize and a march from Miami to Sanford, Florida. And a year later, they occupied the Florida State Legislature, right? This was before Mike Brown was killed. All of these moments lead up to many, many, many moments. I don't even know what's going to happen next week, right? But the young people who responded in Ferguson, they weren't overwhelmingly, they weren't organizers. They were just young people who cared and were tired and didn't want to put up with it anymore. And they sparked something, they sparked an uprising in Ferguson that is unprecedented. Not just unprecedented from their actions, but the response of the state. So many people will say, you know, we have to employ nonviolent tactics. We need to be nonviolent. We need to have peaceful protests. Well, I have to maintain with you all that the most violent entity on this land is the state. And we cannot have any conversation about nonviolence if we're not starting with the violence that the state participates in and leads. And that is what we see throughout the movement for Black Lives. We employ multiple nonviolent tactics in our work. We use social media. We use traditional grassroots organizing. And why so many people even know about this is, as I mentioned, the same night that we decided to start an organization was the same night that Alicia Garza made her post on Facebook, right? And then Patrice, and then Opal joined, and they developed Black Lives Matter, right? 3 black women, 2 of them who are queer black women, right? One who's an immigrant, Nigerian, Opal Tometi, right? They started that. Nobody else. They started that. And so we have this like beautiful soup of all these things happening. All these things happening, and at the same time, black people have been organizing for a long time, even before our organizations existed, before our formations existed. And so how we've begun to talk about the work that we do, and we've done this for now over a year and a half, is that this is the movement for Black Lives. It is one that is composed of well over 50 organizations that have helped to develop the Vision for Black Lives. You all should check that out if you haven't seen it. It's the policy platform. We're at the Policy Institute. If you haven't read the Movement for Black Lives public policy platform, you got to do it. That was developed by over 50 organizations, had a hand in making that happen, right? So what do we want? What do we actually want? Of course, we want liberation for our people. But if we want to get specific about it, what we want are divestments from things and systems and institutions that punish, right? Systems that are actually not good for the earth, things that aren't not generative. We want a movement, and what we're working for, a movement that is about all of our people and not just some of us, right? That builds on the traditions of black feminists and black LGBTQ movement organizing, that says the Compton cafeteria riots are actually important, and that most of us don't know about them. And it says that Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera started the Stonewall Rebellion, not a bunch of straight cisgender white men who were gay. It was 2 trans women, one black and one Latina, who did that. So it's in the work that we do, be it BYP 100 or other organizations in our particular iteration of movement for black liberation, it's about continuously pushing the people, moving our movement and pushing people to move the folks on the margins into the center. Because in doing that, we actually have a much more robust understanding of what is happening to our people, and we are better positioned to develop solutions that are relevant to all of our people. Just yesterday, what happened? Out of the White House. Many things happened. What? All types of foolishness. So, before I open up for questions, I have to name that people right now are in the battle for their lives. For their lives, right? And when we talk about the fact that the new administration, that's what I'm gonna call it, has said that there will be funding pulled from all cities, all sanctuary cities. For me, that is a part of our struggle for Black liberation. That is integral. And it's not just because, it is because, like, I grew up in a Mexican neighborhood, and one of I cut my teeth in direct action around immigrant rights. Like, that's how I cut my teeth. It is because if we are going to talk about dismantling systems of oppression like prisons and detention centers and policing in this country, that we have communities that are intrinsically connected, that are deeply connected. And it also means that there has to be a recognition that when we're talking about immigration and migration in this country, that Black immigrants and migrants are disproportionately impacted. I was just told last night by Opal Tometi, who's the executive director and one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. She's the executive director of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. There are about 1,000 Haitian people at the border right now. How often are people talking about that? Right? We do ourselves a disservice when we tell an incomplete story even about immigration. We're in the Pacific Northwest. The conversations about immigration here are much different from the ones that oftentimes happen in Chicago or even in Florida, right? Because you're going to talk about Asian Pacific Islander, you're going to talk about AAPI folks, you're going to talk about different groups of people, you're going to talk about indigenous people in a different way here than people oftentimes talk about in Florida. You're going to talk about other groups. So what happens when people don't talk about those groups? We have incomplete solutions to immigration. We go in these circles. Right? And so I'm really excited about the work that is ahead of us in 2017. Yes, the shit is wild. It's wild. It's wild. And we're going to lose quite a bit. And more importantly, we're going to have to create a lot in the future. This is also an opportunity for us to get some things right that weren't right before. Because our immigration system was not just broken. It was set up to fail people from the very beginning. And it keeps being chipped away, right? And so there are opportunities for us to work across communities because there are Black people who are Latinos too. These things are not mutually exclusive, right? But how do we actually say all of us are important? All of us are important. And that if we leave any of us out, it's not going to be solved. It's not going to be. And that doesn't mean everybody has to do all of the work in every single community. It does mean that I have some cousins to collect around anti-immigrant sentiments. And it means that other folks got some cousins to collect around anti-Blackness. It means that and then white folks in the room who always get the question, what should I do if I am white? Y'all got a lot of cousins to collect. A lot. A lot. That's not my job. I'll go collect my people because we got some collecting to do. I need everybody else to do the same. So I'll stop there.
Okay. So we have about a half an hour for Q&A. Maybe I'll start. Let me just ask you something you were talking about at the end there about the Trump administration, the elephant in the room. Obviously, there's lots of things to dislike about the Trump administration and their proposals so far. Do you see anything positive in what has come out of the Trump administration yet? And B, has Trump's election made it easier to organize?
So, great question. I don't see anything positive that's come out of this administration. I have no hopes for anything positive that comes out of this administration. I think we have to hold a line that there's nothing normal about what is happening right now. There's nothing normal about it, and it's not okay. And that we can't actually see ground around what is okay and what is normal when our people's lives are at stake. It's actually not a joke. It's not fun. That literally families will be separated. And if you care about your family, you should care about other people's families too. Because you know your family ain't perfect. You know you got that cousin who's always in trouble, right? You might be the cousin who's always in trouble. You got the one who's arguing with people. You got the person who's just not perfect, right? We got to be able to see that in other people's families too. And that even when you got that person, that cousin who's not perfect, you still love them. And you don't want anything bad to happen to them. So I think it's the first thing that's really important. Has it made organizing easier? So in some ways, we've seen so many people activated in this particular moment, right? People who want to do something. So I'm excited about that. When people took to the streets after Election Day, I wasn't one of those folks. I wasn't one. For several reasons. Not because I thought I was better than or it shouldn't be done. I was like, yay, I'm happy that you're doing it even if you've never done it before. And you're not doing it perfectly. There's no such thing. I'm happy that you're doing something, right? At the same time, it creates like this weird thing around communications and media that I don't believe in post-truth lies. Things that are not true. These things are not true. These things are lies. But the administration and the now incoming regime, the current regime, has the ability to just say, I don't believe this. It is not true. And if you do something that they disagree with, especially if it's seen as a personal attack, you will then be attacked. And so I am concerned about like if people will feel confident that they're able to like actually speak out and speak up. And so far, it seems that people are. Just yesterday, I don't know if y'all saw the crane over the White House that said resist. They did a flag drop. One of those people is one of our members, Pearl Robinson. It was not our action. It was Greenpeace's action. But I'm so excited that she was a part of that action. I'm so excited that she was. And that things like that is actually nonviolent direct action, right? Banner drops. It's very creative. Doesn't require a ton of people. And it allows people to receive a message that is different from the narrative that's in the popular media about what people want and what people care about. And so I am concerned about the rhetoric, because the rhetoric it results in real action. Like the anti-immigrant rhetoric is resulting in stripping away funding from sanctuary cities. The anti-immigrant rhetoric is resulting in the next step on building a wall at the U.S.-Mexico border, which is preposterous. It's absolutely absurd. And because I've been to the segregation wall in Palestine, and I just learned that they have walls in Ireland. I had no idea. I just came back from Ireland yesterday. I had no idea. And they call them peace lines. And it's fascinating. If you don't know about them, you should look them up. I'm just learning about them. But walls separate people. Obviously, that's the goal of them. So I'm concerned about that. And I'm troubled and I'm angry about it. And so I think it will allow us to bring more people, and our environment is one in such that the government can retaliate, the levels of surveillance, all of those things can make organizing more difficult. So yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. I think one of the things that I personally struggle with that concerns rhetoric, what concerns my ability to act and affect change, is trying to understand when to be soft and measured in my words and choose to engage that cousin or that friend or that colleague, and when to just say, what you're doing is wrong, it's messed up, it hurts me, and we're done. How do you decide? What's the cue? What do you look towards? How do you decide when to be diplomatic and when to communicate the message without your words but with your actions and just be upset?
Yeah. I think everybody has different lines. First of all, thank you for asking that question. Everybody has a different line for what you're able to tolerate and what you're able to handle. Because sometimes, like literally, someone's rhetoric or beliefs can result in you being physically harmed or killed. Again, it can be that drastic. Sometimes it can mean your feelings are hurt. You're offended, right? It makes you sad or it makes you angry. And so I think it's all, for me, it's been important with my family members. I'll talk about what I've done with my family members. I have a family member, cousin, literally a cousin, who's watched this documentary called Hidden Colors and has taken it to heart. Too much when it comes to women. black women in particular. And I talked to him, and I'm also queer. I'm a lesbian, so I've talked to him, and he would say things that are like homophobic and misogynist. And then one day I was just like, yo, if you say this one more time, I'm going to unfriend you on Facebook, and I'm not going to talk to you anymore. He did it again, and I had to unfriend him. Then he started to get his act together. And I wouldn't speak to him either. And I've known him all my life, and I love him. I'm not going to do him bodily harm because he's he's saying awful things on social media and also in person. But I did the work of trying because he's someone that I love, and he's a family member, right? He's not a random person off the streets. I'm not going to argue with someone like who I don't know and I don't have a relationship with. I'm not going to do it. Somebody can stand up here right now and refute everything I have to say. That's cool. I'll have a response, but it's not my job to like convince you otherwise if you've already made your mind up. If we don't have a relationship with each other because you don't know me and I don't know you. And so it has to start with people you have relationships with, right? And it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be fun all the time. I feel like what you just said was like, it sounded, I mean, people take things all types of, but it sounded very like grounded. And like, explain how you felt, how you feel, why you feel what you feel, and what you need to do. And in these particular times, in this moment, that type of courage is necessary. And if we can do it with our family members, then I think we're better able to do it in collective organizing groups. So yeah, it's something we have to do, and it's what I do with my family all the time.
You said in your speech you cut your teeth when it comes to immigration rights. Would you be willing to clarify that for me?
Yeah. So like the first time I ever was like in a real direct action was an immigrant rights action, like related to. I remember the first like time I'd ever supported somebody who was doing like a hard blockade. If you've ever seen folks with like the tubes around their arms, they're called lock boxes. It's like you see people do direct action, use their bodies, or they use like physical equipment to attach themselves to something or to another person. Was outside of the hotel where President Obama was staying in Chicago on Michigan Avenue. We shut down Michigan Avenue. This was years ago. This was like maybe 2011 or 12. And yeah, and I was there in support. And so, and other actions that I'd been a part of or saw, they were in the immigrant rights space, calling for an end to deportations, and sometimes calling for the DREAM Act, depending on the year, and then sometimes calling for comprehensive immigration reform, depending on the group. And I remember doing an action outside the White House, before the DREAM Act came up for a vote, and some people took arrest, and it was actually an action with immigrant youth from like Brazil, Colombia, Haiti, and then some non-immigrant youth as well. So yeah, that's where I first learned. Yes.
Since even before the march on Saturday, there's been, I think, a lot of talk about women, especially becoming divided, and it creating a much deeper us and them kind of rhetoric. Do you see that from where you're at, or do you feel like people are coming together more? And either way, what do you think we can do to foster that come together?
Yeah. So when you say us and them, which us and them are you thinking of?
I've heard a lot about like a race-based us and them, white women versus women of color in particular.
Yeah. That's what I thought. That's where I thought you were going. I'm pushing you to be more explicit in what you're saying. I'm also a teacher, so I love to. If there was a whiteboard in here, I'd be on the whiteboard or chalkboard. So, when we talk about areas of division within the broader like feminist community, women's movement, we got to start a long time ago. We got to go back, right? We don't have to go all the way back through chattel slavery, but we for sure have to even just talk about the suffragist movement, right? So, white women won the right to vote, not all women. Right? Black women did not win the right to vote through the 19th Amendment. And there were various struggles and like also real relationships between white women and black women. I think it was Ida B. Wells and Susan B. Anthony had some a solid relationship with each other, I believe. Don't quote me on that. So it wasn't always contentious on every single level. But like, so I'm in a sorority, I'm in Delta Sigma Theta, and like the first thing we did within a month of our founding in 1913 was march in the women's suffrage march, March 13th, 1913. And they marched. They were the only contingency of black women, and they were towards the back of the march. And so if you just think about, like, there's no, this is not brand new, these dynamics that exist, right? And I said we don't have to go all the way back to chattel slavery, but you have to also think about the relationship between white women who were the wives of people who own people, and how those dynamics showed up. And then if we look to like the women's movement of the 60s and the 70s, there were of course black women involved and other women of color involved in that movement. And there was also a black feminist movement. In fact, black feminist organizations, people who left the white women's organizations and started their own, be it the National Black Feminist Organization, the Combahee River Collective, the Third World Women's Alliance, a host of organizations that existed for a span of 10 years. There's a book called Living for the Revolution by Kimberly Springer that talks about black feminist organizations and a lot of those dynamics and why they exist. And so the Women's March is a manifestation of decades of dynamics that occur. Now, we also know that Tamika Mallory, if you may not know, you should know, Tamika Mallory, Carmen Perez, and Linda Sarsour were one black woman, a Palestinian woman, and a Latina woman who came in and pulled up a lot of leadership in the Women's March, right? To say that this space actually needs to be intersectional and we need to do more, right? And Linda's also a mom, too, and a New Yorker. And so those divisions, for sure, they exist. I think what's really important, like to keep it all the way 100 with you, is that white women need to look like internally and make some clear choices to give up power that's been held on for too long, for much too long, and not just move aside and disappear, but 54% of white women voters voted for Donald Trump. Somebody needs to organize them. They did not vote for Hillary Clinton, right? And so that means something. That means something. I don't know if y'all saw the picture floating around Facebook with, don't forget, white women voted for Trump. That's my friend Angela Peoples. Oh my gosh. And I'm laughing because she has a lollipop in her mouth, and that's the funniest part of the picture for me. And that like makes the picture what it is. She looks so unbothered. But it's indicative of like what white women need to do. White women need to go organize. White women who actually believe in choice, but still voted for Trump. Believe in equal pay, but still voted for Trump. Believe in environmental justice, and still voted for Trump. How did that happen? Folks thought they were a shoe-in. Thought that was a guarantee. So there's a lot of work to be done there. There's a lot of work to be done there. And following the leadership of black, brown, indigenous women, queer women, trans women. There were several trans women who spoke at the Women's March in D.C. They have things to say that, yes, have to do with them being trans women, and things that have to do with all of us because we're all women, right? So I think it's like listening more, not having your feelings hurt because somebody disagreed with you, or feeling attacked because someone disagreed with you. It's a part of the work, feeling uncomfortable. It's a part of the work. And if you want to be an organizer or an activist, and I'll say what the difference, what I believe to be the difference. is if you want to do that work, you have to be okay with being uncomfortable. And that goes for all of us. Me, myself absolutely included. Right? And so when I talk about organizing and activism, what I mean is that an activist is someone who cares about something and will take action on it to create some type of change or some type of outcome that they want to see in the world. They will take an action. They will show up to a rally, they'll do a teach-in, they'll show up to something like this, they'll bring a friend with them, right? They'll post things on Facebook. So, and that's important. I'm not saying that because I think it's not important. It's actually important because lots of people get their information from there, right? Lots of people. And so activism doesn't have a value attached to it. Like you can be conservative, you can be radical, you can be revolutionary, all that, and be an activist. Organizing you can be an organizer and be an activist because you care about something, you take action on it. Organizers take up the work of developing leaders. Intentionally developing leaders and relationships for the sake of developing collective strategies, and a strategies is a plan that includes a set of actions. Right? People like to use fancy words or whatever. We keep it real plain. A set of actions in order to achieve a desired outcome. So actually you can't wake up one day and decide to be an organizer and just do it. And do it well. It's a craft. It's a craft. Ella Baker studied the craft, practiced the craft. Doing one phone bank doesn't make you an organizer. But it's a practice, it's a set of habits, right? That you can engage in. And it looks different in all communities. If you know in your community you can't have a meeting without food, you better have food at the beginning. That's a part of organizing. If you know in your community you need to have translators, because people are speaking multiple, like speaking different languages. You got an issue happening in your community, and people speak different languages, and like they need to build relationship with it, whatever that is. An organizer's job is to determine those things, right? And not to do those things themselves. That is the whole job of the whole purpose of developing leaders, so that other people can do that. Ella Baker says, strong people don't need a strong leader. Organizers have to help develop other people, because you can't be the only one with the bullhorn. People do it, but if you're serious about movement building towards collective power and collective liberation, you gotta develop leaders at the same time. Like I'm an activist on certain issues, but I don't organize on every issue. And that's cool. You're gonna be an activist, be a dope activist. Do it. If you're gonna be an organizer, be a dope organizer. Don't be raggedy. I'm not saying perfect, but work. It's a craft. Any other questions? I'm not sure how much more time we have. Yeah, we still have time. We still have like 15 minutes.
Let me ask you another.
So obviously, President Obama being elected the first black president was a huge step forward in the civil rights movement. And I know that you said that you didn't see any, or you weren't very certain about the Trump administration going forward.
No, I'm certain about that.
Well, so you're very against that, and I guess I'm someone that likes to look for some light at the end of the tunnel. So, do you think that there's something to be said or something symbolic about having somebody like Dr. Ben Carson, that's a black doctor that grew up very poor in Detroit? He's a self-made man that rose to the top. Like you maybe see I guess what's the word I'm looking for? Silver lining and something like that. Obviously it's not a position as powerful as a president, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, so optimism is always important. Always. I couldn't do this work without thinking that something like good is possible. And hold on to that. Always. I don't, like, every moment I don't feel it. I don't feel it, like, sometimes it's out the window. And I'm just thinking, like, can I continue to do this? So, optimism is important. And looking for silver linings is also important. On Ben Carson, Zora Neale Hurston, who was an anthropologist wrote the book Their Eyes Were Watching God. She's a prolific writer, amazing storyteller, said that not all my skinfolk are my kinfolk. And basically what that means is just because you're black doesn't mean you have the interests of your people in mind. And so Dr. Ben Carson is he's a surgeon, right?
Neurosurgeon.
A neurosurgeon. I don't know what he knows about housing. I'm not aware of what he knows about housing and development. I have heard that of some of the things that he wants to do. Like I've read some of the things that he wants to do with housing and urban development, or the department. I'm not optimistic. I know people who eat, breathe, and sleep housing policy and urban development policy who would take that office to different heights, right? Because that's what they do and that's what they're passionate about. I'm not convinced that Dr. Carson is passionate about poor people. I'm not convinced that he's passionate about poor people, because that is what's required of that job. I'm not convinced that he'll do anything to actually remove the barriers that people who have drug felonies have in public housing, or family members of people who have drug felonies to have access to public housing, or people telling people that you can't smoke a cigarette in your house or outside of your home because you're in public housing, or whatever that is. How people are, like, the daily indignities that you have to face if you live in public housing. They're astronomical, and many of us have not experienced those things, and many of us have experienced those things. You shouldn't have to experience it. I'm not to say that he has to have lived in public housing in order to do this job well. I think if we want him to do the job well, somebody has to hold him accountable to doing it, and then perhaps he can actually do a good job. I don't know if this man has, I don't know if he's mean-spirited or nice. I don't know what his character is. I have no idea. I can't pass that judgment on him. But no politician does anything without people making them do it. And that includes Barack Obama. Absolutely includes him. He said it time and time again. He actually borrowed things from Franklin Roosevelt. He borrows it from, it's either Franklin or Theodore. That he borrows it from, like, you know, you want a president to do something, you have to agitate them into doing it. And so that's how it's going to happen. And maybe there's a possibility for it to happen there. You know, Frederick Douglass said, power concedes to nothing without a demand. Yeah, I even say power concedes to nothing without an organized demand. And if that happens, maybe Dr. Carson will do right by his people. So, we'll see. That's my diagnosis of the situation. So, yeah. Yes.
So, when I heard about this meeting and it said that it was the Black Lives Matter movement, like it was on that, I knew that for me personally that it wasn't something that I was, going to be, it was going to be interesting regardless. And so I told myself at a minimum I would come in here open-minded, and that I would listen to it and I would take whatever I could from it. Yeah. But you know, as I listened, I realized that you sound so close-minded about Trump and about possibilities and about the people that see a future for this country and all the things that are optimistic in our eyes and in the eyes of the people that voted him into office. And so it was just kind of disappointing to hear how you shut down everything between the women that voted for him, policies, anything. You said there's no optimism when you said you have to be optimistic. And so I just want to say that was disappointing.
I'm interested in one piece you said, the hopes that you have. I'm really interested in hearing what your hopes are for this administration, what you believe is possible.
Oh, we could talk all day about that.
Just give me a couple.
Immigration. Shoot, I do think that he legitimately wants to help people within the inner cities. I do think that he wants to help black people, Hispanic people that have struggled. I legitimately believe that. And Those are just two big things that I think everybody here could agree with that are important. So there's two.
Okay. So I'm from Chicago, and he's talked a lot about my city through the debates. And just the other day, he sends a tweet about if we don't stop the carnage, he's going to send the feds in. This is what he said. What we know to be true is that in the city of Chicago, we've had unacceptable numbers of people being killed from gun violence. I know that to be true. It's unacceptable. This is unacceptable. We also know to be true is that in the past couple of years, over 50 is actually the low estimate. That was what happened in just a couple of years ago, but there have been more since then. Over 50 public schools have been closed in the city of Chicago. 97% of the students who attended those schools were black students, right? We spend in the city of Chicago on average $4 million a day on policing. Something's not adding up. Trump has a law and order policy, a law and order belief. Law and order has never worked in the city of Chicago as a solution to violence. What does deter violence, what we know, what research shows, and not from liberal, radical institutions, is that solutions to poverty and crime are jobs. Jobs. Good jobs. I think many of us could find the rationality in that. What Trump has not talked about is funding mental health care, schools, and I know the federal government doesn't fund public schools directly, so waiting on that comment from somebody. Job creation in inner cities. That is not. What his proposal for Chicago is to send the feds in. All right. And so what we've seen in black communities and brown communities and indigenous communities is that, be it from the so-called war on drugs, which is really a war on poor people, but now we have a different level of empathy for drug usage when it comes to methamphetamines and things that white people use. It's a different level of empathy, much different level. That is not his platform. I've read the new agenda, the agenda for Black America, the New Deal for Black America. I've read it through and through. The policies in which that are being forwarded, and he talks about job creation. So I saw a hand. I don't know if that's what it is about. These are empty. It's not simply about empty. It's not simply about an empty promise, but the measures in which, and it's enough that actually I think if some black folks get a job, they're going to be excited and they're going to be on his side. If we look at comprehensively at the New Deal for Black America, it is more of law and order policy that has continuously harmed our communities, that costs much. We spend 81, at least a minimum, we spend millions of dollars every year in putting people in prisons and jails, and we continuously, and I'm talking about a Democratic mayor that closed all these schools. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican when it comes to these issues. I want to know who's doing what's right. So and we have a democratically controlled government in Chicago. The rhetoric and the New Deal that is put forth is not the plan that has come from black people doing work every single day in our communities and living in our communities. We have a plan. We've set forth a vision. That is not the same vision that is in the New Deal for Black America. And so I hope you hold on to your level of optimism about what this administration will do in our communities. I know, as a student of history, and as someone who was born and raised in Chicago, that this is not the first time we've heard this. And it won't be the last time. It has never worked. It has never worked.
And I'll briefly push back just before he gets to his point. I think that your focus on saying that law and order is not the answer is way too... You're attacking the wrong thing. Though I appreciate the different things that you named as far as health care and the different ways that you can mitigate all of these things that are causing the issue. It's a definitely multifaceted issue. But law and order is a very important aspect of this. And though if it's solely focused on just that, it would clearly fail. But I think that choosing that as the enemy, choosing that as the point where we've failed, is the wrong thing to focus on. And I think that if there has been a plan, like you said, in these communities to fix them, then they need some new ideas because they still have a lot of issues. So I feel like maybe there are some to come.
The one thing I'll say to that is I didn't choose law and order. Trump chose it. It's a cornerstone of his policy.
America chose law and order.
Well, I just want to say that
So we have time for one more question. So just one more.
I didn't choose it. He chose it.
Just to add into that conversation, you say that Trump's promise, which he has, you initially said that he didn't talk about job creation, and that's one of the things he has talked about a lot, actually. And he's already been successful at that. He's convinced Ford and Chrysler to build factories and produce cars in the United States, in cities like Detroit, Chicago, wherever they're going to build their factories, and deter them from building them in Mexico and wherever else. He is creating jobs, and he is going to stimulate the economy. The, what was it, Dow just went over 20,000, or whichever.
Well, I'm no expert in the stock exchange, the stock market, so I don't actually know what that means. But
so he's talked extensively about stimulating the economy, bringing jobs, etc. So I just to add on to his thing, I'm also kind of.
Is there a question? Do you have a question?
Yeah. Do you have a question?
Okay. One last question.
Well, just one thing I would say, since we're going back to the policing policy, is that's not necessarily a Trump policy. That's an American policy. I mean, law is the foundation of our country. Law and order is the foundation of America.
Do you have a question?
Huh?
Do you have a question?
Why are we silencing people? This is
I'm
a
not,
conversation. So anyway, just replying to that is, I would just say that.
If I could say something very quickly.
Sure.
So I didn't start this work because Donald Trump was elected.
No, I understand that completely.
The same thing I'm saying right now, I was saying before he was elected. I was saying it with Barack Obama during Barack Obama's presidency. Barack Obama deported more people than any other American president. I will be on the front lines now as I was then. What is unacceptable for me is is the tactic that says that our grievances or our issues are squarely about Trump. He could leave tomorrow, and the same thing I'm saying right now will remain. I will not allow in debate or conversation without a response for me to say that and to really center that. And you are absolutely right. The 13th Amendment codifies imprisonment and mass incarceration. It codifies slavery through that. It says that. That's what it says. It says that. The Constitution has created a law and order state. And it has been people, everyday people, like the people in this room, who have fought to change that. Because just because a law is a law doesn't mean it's just. I don't think anybody would argue that the Holocaust, the mass genocide of Jewish people, was okay. I don't think anybody would argue that, but it was legal.
Okay.
Would you say the 13th Amendment is why African Americans are targeted?
It's a part of it.
Like the no Jim Crow laws and all that.
It's how it was codified through law, right? And so the 13th Amendment allows for the black codes. It allows for Jim Crow laws. It allows for legal segregation or apartheid in the U.S. It allows for that. It allows for the constitutionally allows. And I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I know what the 13th Amendment says, like explicitly. So with that,
I hate to cut us off when it's just getting interesting, and I appreciate all the conversations or questions. So let me say this before we thank our speaker. For those of you who want to hear her again, she'll be speaking this evening at 6:30 in the Cub Senior Ballroom. And so we welcome you to come out to that. Remember, our events on the Trump administration are starting next week, by the way. And now, join me in thanking Charlene for a really interesting